Hey everybody, it's me, Angela Walters. Welcome to my weekly live chat. I'm sorry I was kind of MIA the last couple of weeks. I was under the weather and then out of town, but I'm glad to be back today talking about quilting, specifically talking about design ideas for borders, especially the challenge border that we just finished up. But before we get into all of that, a couple things. I have a giveaway today, so if you are watching live, leave a comment because Jessica's behind the monitor as usual, checking out the chat and writing down your questions so I can answer them. And she's going to pick one lucky winner at the end of my live chat to win a kit. So if you caught my most recent Midnight Quilter video, I showed you how to make the home wall hanging. Turn it to the side. Little quilt as you go wall hanging. And in the video, I talked about how my son bought his first house and moved out and just left me alone. But anyway, that's beside the point. But one lucky winner is going to get the kit for that. So to make a cute little home wall hanging. And I kind of joked, it's perfect for, a housewarming gift or just for yourself, and a lot of fun. And in the next video that comes out for Midnight Quilter, I'll be giving you quilting ideas for it. So it's all about the home wall hanging these couple of days. Like I said, I'm going to talk about border ideas. If you have questions, be sure to put those in the chat. I'll answer those at the end. And then at the end, I have a little sneak peek about the next quilting series. So lots of fun stuff coming up. First of all, let's talk about borders. Now, I'm going to be showing design ideas for the optional border panel of the Arcs, Curves, and Points Ruler Challenge that we just wrapped up a couple weeks ago. But even if you didn't get the borders, or even if you're not quilting along with that, there's still some good practical tips that you can apply to other borders. So I'm excited to kind of show you some ideas for that. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, the video series is on my YouTube channel, or you can visit quiltingismytherapy.com. It has all the free videos on there, and you can kind of go down that rabbit hole of watching all the videos with that. But throughout the series, we saw how to machine quilt, or learned how to machine quilt with some different kinds of rulers, and it was a lot of fun. We just kind of wrapped that up, which is always kind of a big moment. But for those of you that have already been like, okay, I'm excited for the next free motion challenge, don't worry, we've been working on it. So I'll have some details about that eventually. All right, so here's the optional border panel that you could put with your quilt panel. And as you can see, it's a little bit geometric, kind of random size pieces and stuff, kind of like an improvisationally pieced border. So the takeaway here is, how do you quilt blocks or quilts with all different sizes of things? That improvisationally pieced block, or wonky blocks or wonky borders, are really cool, but they can be tricky to quilt. So even though I'm talking about this particular border panel, you can really apply these tips to other kind of improvisationally pieced things. Now, one thing I did is I didn't have time to sew the border on the quilt, so I just loaded the panel and quilted some design ideas on here. And so I have some step-by-step pictures, and you can kind of see what's going on. First of all, when you're dealing with improvisationally pieced blocks, you can see all the different pieces here. Stitching along the ditch is always a great option, especially for smaller blocks like this. This particular strip is only 4.5 inches long, so those pieces are kind of on the smaller side, meaning I don't really have to put anything inside the blocks if I don't want to. The tricky part here, though, is when you're stitching in the ditch or along the fake ditch of the panel, sometimes you might find yourself stuck because it's not necessarily a continuous line kind of thing. If that happens, just travel over a quilted line, continue on. I think sometimes when we're quilting, especially, when we're trying to be very precise, we're 2 inches away from our quilt, it's easy to see every little bit of imperfection. But I promise, once you step back, you'll just see the beautiful quilting. And I know I say that about 1 million times in my videos, but I feel like I have to keep, saying it so you guys will believe me. So great option for improvisationally pieced blocks, especially smaller ones. And here you can kind of see the other side. Now, in this example, I'm using like a darker thread so you can really see the quilting, and we'll see that especially on the lighter part. But when you're dealing with blocks of all colors, sometimes picking a thread color can be tricky. I usually like to aim for something that hits the middle range. So if I have, red and purple, I'm going to try to find something in between there. But here you can kind of see how that stitching makes it look like it's pieced, which I love, Perfect for somebody that you love that's not necessarily quilt worthy, or maybe you don't have time to make the whole quilt. That gives you that pieced look without doing it. And then in the other side of the border, I thought, well, let's go ahead and continue this idea of quilting random triangles and kind of giving it that improvisationally pieced look. Now here's where we can start to see that contrasting thread color. I did this so you could see my quilting, but if I were actually doing this on a border, you can probably guess I'm not going to use purple thread in that area. When it comes to this kind of quilting, I really want the texture to show up, not necessarily those lines, especially since they might not be perfect. So just know that the contrasting thread color here is for illustration purposes. Now, when you're quilting random shapes, sometimes the idea of just like quilting random sizes can be tricky. It's funny because I think we're kind of wired to want to make everything consistent if we can. But just try not to fret too much about it. Try not to plan too much. Just quilt some triangles. And then if you want to add a pop of texture or some more detail, you can fill in some of the triangles. And here I've just kind of filled in with some back and forth lines. Now, the reason I do this isn't just to give it that nice texture, although that is one of the reasons. It helps me move my way through an area. So let's pretend I quilt a triangle and I'm stuck in the corner. I don't have anywhere to go. I can use that filler to work my way to another corner. So even though it's dense and it took a while, it does also help me work through it efficiently. Again, just trying to kind of go with that same overall look on the other side. So when you can kind of pull out some of the piecing and use it in the background areas of your quilt, whether it's in your border panel or around your blocks, it's kind of a fun way to kind of show that texture there. And so here you can see that example. Again, just kind of not planning it out too much, just quilting my triangles and having fun with it. Now, I recently finished a quilt for Tula Pink, which I'm going to show in an upcoming week, probably 2 weeks from now, 2 or 3 weeks from now. And I used this technique on that quilt, so I can't wait to show you what that looks like in other areas. Now, another option you have is when I have all these, different pieces, I can just kind of disregard the piecing and look to the overall shape, right? So instead of looking to the individual triangles and quilting along them, I'm just looking to the outer, I'm just looking to the whole area. So here I've just kind of stitched along the seam or the fake seam in between the two sections of that border panel. And then to highlight that shape, I'm going to add some echoing. But since we're already kind of on a improvisationally pieced kick, I'm going to make the echoing random. So here you can kind of see I've kind of echoed that line, but I've made those echo lines get further and closer apart just to look kind of random. Now, this is a good news because you might be thinking, well, heck, that's what mine looks like when I'm trying to make them even. Perfect. The trick here, though, is when you're kind of making it random and changing up that spacing, do it enough that it looks intentional. I don't want it to be kind of close where it looks like I just messed up. I want it to be pretty obvious that this is what I'm going for. So the moral of this story is if you're going to make a mistake, just make it big enough that it looks like you meant to do it. So here I'm just kind of echoing that shape, kind of disregarding the individual pieces, and then adding more and more echo lines. Again, making them random, just kind of having fun with that shape, and really just kind of enjoying that. Now, if you are struggling with this, especially if you have been quilting a while and you've been kind of really good at keeping it consistent, sometimes just forcing yourself to go further away and further and closer might help you. The idea here is our brains really kind of love repetition. And sometimes it's hard to be random because our brain wants to do the same thing over and over. So sometimes I'll give myself a random pattern to follow. So I'll say close, close, far, or something like that. Although when I say that out loud, it sounds kind of crazy. So just, do what you need to do. Now, as I'm echoing or kind of filling in that area, when I get to a point where I'm running into the edge, so here I've hit the edge of the border strip. This could be the edge of the block or another design. I can just fill in that unquilted area by traveling along the edge of the border. Traveling, stitching along that seam is how I'm going to bounce around an area. And especially with borders, if it's the edge that's the outside of the quilt that's going to get trimmed off anyway, perfect. I don't have to worry so much. So I've just kind of used that traveling to fill in those areas while I'm there so I can move on. And you can kind of see where I did that. The thread kind of actually blends in really well with this side of the quilt. Anyway, when I'm done, I have that kind of random, kind of geometric look, kind of building off of that one kind of shape. So again, when you're looking at your quilt blocks, maybe instead of focusing on the little pieces, focus maybe on bigger chunks of it and see if you can't highlight that. Now, again, when it works great in the blocks, you can pull that beyond the blocks. Now, of course, this is the same border, but let's pretend you're working on a block with the background. I can do that same idea, quilting those random kind of echo lines. So much fun because it kind of takes that pressure off. I don't have to make sure it's measured perfectly, and it kind of gives it a really kind of cool effect. And you can kind of see that here. And then when you decide you're done, you can add a filler in the rest of the area. This is something I say a lot in my videos. It's something like that makes it a lot easier for me. It's like, okay, go until you're tired of it and then just throw another design in there. Here you can see I've done some wishbones and some ribbon candy, really anything that you want to put in that area to fill it in. So it just kind of really is a nice contrast between that filler and that geometric kind of echoing. And again, definitely would use thread color that blends here so that you get that nice texture, but you get the idea, right? Another thing you can do is when you're looking at blocks, or let's say a quilt that has a bunch of small blocks, you can use the quilting to highlight just random blocks in that bigger area. This is something we did in the swirls video series, so if you want to go check that out. But here, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to quilt swirls all in this area, but in some of those random triangles, I'm going to stitch around the ditch and leave them unquilted. And that's really going to help them kind of pop off of that, kind of squishes that rest of that area down and makes those triangles kind of show up to the front. This is really fun because you can use this idea to show off the parts of your quilt that are your favorite colors of fabric, maybe the blocks that you actually pieced well. I'm not the best piecer, so this is definitely what I would do, or just because you just want to randomly make them show up. So it's just a great idea to add a little bit of extra to really kind of show that off. So here you can kind of see I'm quilting that filler design. It just so happens to be swirls, but you could definitely use anything. Stitching around the outside of the triangle, I want to leave unquilted, and then filling in the rest of the area. And depending on how motivated you are, you could, just do this on a couple shapes. You can do them on multiple shapes. It really is up to you. So a fun way to kind of give it a different look. What I really, really love about quilting is you can use it to highlight or hide parts of the quilt. So for instance, if this were a bunch of improvisationally pieced blocks, maybe, like I said, I'm not piecing so great or whatever, I can use the quilting to show off what I want to show off and then kind of use the rest of it to kind of squish it all together. So really fun technique, whether that's over the whole quilt or within smaller blocks like this. Now, when it comes to borders, the classics are usually the best, right? So here we can see the classic piano key border. The piano key is basically just echo lines where you travel along the edge of the border and come back down. This is great for borders of all sizes. It's great for busier borders where you just want something to hold it down. You don't want anything too fussy, too over the top. You just want to give it that nice kind of geometric look. I love how it looks. You can change up the spacing between your lines. You can, have fun with that. But sometimes the tricky part is the traveling, right? So since I'm kind of going back and forth here, one of the edges I'm going to be traveling along is probably going to be on the inside of the quilt. So one option you have is to skip that traveling on one side. And to do that, I'm basically going to quilt that same line so it goes up, but stop short of those blocks, echo, and then come back down. So it's kind of like a variation of an echo. But what I love about it is it really kind of shows off that kind of shape that the border has. And incidentally, it's easier to quilt because I don't have to travel along that piecing. This is really helpful if, let's say, I'm working on a quilt like this that are two different colors and I'm like using a thread color that might show up more on one area. Plus, it's just fun and different and just kind of a slightly different look. But just like the piano keys, you can change up the spacing between them. You can make them further apart, closer together. It really is kind of like a choose your own quilting adventure. I know I use that term a lot, but it's true. But it's kind of gives it a fun look. And I love contrast with the quilting. Contrast, just different stuff. So if I did swirls on one side of that, I'll do some geometric quilting on the other. There's no rule that says you have to do that. That's just kind of the rule that I give myself to make it easier to pick designs. So if I'm working my way through a quilt, and let's say I've quilted swirls in a block and now I need to figure out what to do in the border strips, I'm going to do usually something different, geometric or something opposite. You can take that piano key idea too and spread them out and throw in some different filler designs like I've done here. I especially like this if it's a pieced border, like maybe like strips, or if I want to practice a design in a smaller, kind of more defined area. Let's pretend that you're working on that pesky ribbon candy design that can be tricky for some quilters. Well, instead of quilting it over a whole big area, I can just keep those little areas, fill it in. So even if I'm holding my breath or cussing while I'm doing it, it's not too long. So it just kind of gives it a fun look, changes it up, and lets you have fun with it. Again, you can pick different fillers for this. Totally up to you. All right, but wait, there's more. When I loaded the panel strip or the border strip, I was like, how many ideas can I come up with? And this is not specific to this design, but I really didn't know exactly how I was going to quilt the border. I had some ideas. I think sometimes we feel like we have to have the whole plan before we get started. But really loading that quilt on there and just starting with some of the quilting really gets the ideas coming. So if you're one of those that wants to know all the steps before you start, that's totally fine. But just know it doesn't have to be that way. That's not in my notes. That's just totally offhand, but I figure it applies. Now, when you're working with borders or let's say strips like this, instead of looking to the individual pieces, I can just quilt the whole thing with one design. I love this wavy border design because it works in borders of all widths. It works in, a lot bigger borders and thinner borders. It gives it a nice kind of texture. And another thing I love is that it breaks that border up into like chunks. I'm a huge fan of chunking my borders. That means just kind of making my area and filling it in. I showed how to do this in the Floral Frames Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along, so if you want to check that out, or the Borders and Backgrounds video series, it's actually a lot of fun to quilt. So basically what I'm doing is using my quilting to quilt wavy lines to create triangles and then filling them in. So here we can see I have this triangle shape going from one side of the border to the other. The size does not matter. It just depends on, how much throat space you have. The size of that triangle doesn't determine the density, it's the spacing between your lines. So make your section and then fill it in with some more wavy lines. So here I've just kind of echoed inside or traveled and then echoed inside with those wavy lines, filling in that shape. And as I work my way through an area, then I have that nice kind of texture going in different directions. And what I love about this is usually most quilters find it pretty easy to quilt. I think anybody can quilt a wavy line. If you don't think you can, try quilting a straight line. Chances are it'll turn wavy, but a nice textured design. Sometimes I don't want anything too fussy in the borders. I don't want to spend time on that. Maybe I've done some really intricate quilting in the center, and now I'm just ready to be done with the quilt. So you don't have to do difficult stuff over the whole quilt. All right, lastly, the last option is sometimes I just skip it, kind of use the quilting to create the shape I want to quilt. So in this example, that geometric kind of border shape. Well, maybe I want to quilt a feather that kind of follows that line, sort of, but it's tricky to quilt feathers so that they come off of a geometric shape like that. So here you can see my spine, this kind of wavy line, somewhat follows the general shape, even though it's not perfectly on it. This might feel a little weird, but the idea is it's going to be close enough. It's going to kind of soften that up. This is especially something I like to do if I have blocks with a lot of little pieces, or maybe it's really geometric. I might just kind of quilt the line curvy over it. And then I can start quilting my feathers off of it, adding those pieces, those little petals to it. Now, when you're working through this, I know not everybody loves feathers, but they're so much fun. They're my favorite. If you have a border like this where one side is thicker than the other, maybe I don't want to quilt my petals all the way out to that shape. You can see towards the top I used echoing to fill it in. So no matter what you're working on, if it doesn't fill in that whole area, especially if you've got the larger borders, you can just use echoing to fill in those shapes. So nice kind of idea here. These pictures are actually out of order, so this is in progress. You can see the feathers, and there's the first one, so totally flipped around. It's like the deconstructed feather. I'm going back in time. Don't you wish quilting was that easy to take out? Anyway, you can get the idea here. So basically, I'm using that improv shape kind of as a general guide, but not feeling like I have to follow it exactly. So using that kind of makes it a little bit easier for me. So hopefully that gives you some design ideas. I know that was kind of like bam, 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 but the idea is to kind of give you an idea of what I'm thinking about when I'm looking at these areas. But really, I know I've said this before, but the most important thing is that you just quilt it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be the perfect design. Because once you're done, then you have your finished quilt and you can actually use it. Because it's not a quilt until it's quilted. So try not to get too hung up on all of that. So hopefully that gave you some design ideas for it, for your borders or other quilts that you'll be tackling. Now, I know this officially wraps up that Free Motion Challenge Quilting Along, but like I said, we'll have another one soon. I've already kind of worked on it, and we're going to be seeing feathers again. A little teaser there, and have a lot of fun. Okay, a couple things that are coming up. Next week in the live chat, I'm going to be talking about the Hello Spring series. This is kind of like the Season's Greetings one I did in November, where we're quilting a panel and making some fun stuff out of it. So I'm going to give you all the details, and I have the panel right here. I'm going to show you in a second so you can see what it looks like, just a little sneak peek. But then also save the date. So if we're located in Kansas City, Missouri, or just outside Kansas City, Missouri, our quilt walk is coming up June 6th. So that's our big outdoor event. It's a lot of fun. You get to wander around the downtown area and pick up pieces of a quilt pattern. And here's the quilt that we'll be making during this quilt walk. So kind of celebrating America's 250th anniversary. Just kind of putting that in your head. If you happen to live in the area or happen to be coming through, you can definitely stop by. I'll be sharing more about that. And I know not everybody lives in this area, but we will have the kit available for pre-order in the future. So just keep that in the back, just kind of percolating there. All right, before I get to the questions, like I said, the Hello Spring video series will be starting soon. It's just like where we're quilting together and making some products. But here I can show you the panel, some of the quilting I did there. So you can kind of see. We'll talk more about this, but people on the type chat were asking for a sneak peek. So there we go. Kind of fun. All right, now I'm sure we have some questions. But again, if you're not watching live, you can leave your questions in the comment section. I get on there from time to time. And then, or join me for my live chats and ask me. Even if you're participating in a previous challenge or video series, you can ask me questions about it. It's totally fine. So like, if you're like, oh, I haven't done these ruler videos, no problem. Just do them. And then if you have any questions, you can let me know. Okay, questions. Do you need to replace your needles more when quilting with batiks? Not necessarily more, but before, if that makes sense. So if I'm in a quilt top that's batik, especially if the top and backing are batik, I'll go ahead and put a new needle in. The reason is batik fabric is tighter woven, so it's harder for the needle to get through that fabric. So you definitely don't want to be working with a dull needle in that. But I don't feel like I have to replace one when I'm done. I just make sure I work with a sharp one. I would be interested to hear what everybody else has to say about that. So leave a comment on the video and let me know what your thoughts are on that, because maybe you found something different. How far apart are my lines when I'm free motion quilting? All right, so if you see my quilting, you know I love to quilt stuff to death. Quilt it till it's dead and then add some more, like it's always been my motto. So my lines are about 1/4 inch apart. Now, when I show you Tula's quilt, that quilt that was really close. I can't wait to show how teeny tiny that stuff was. But you can change that up. I know that's not the question, but if you don't like dense quilting or you don't have tons of time to spend on it, just spread it out. You can make your lines 1/2 inch apart or even further. So just because I have a tendency to quilt my stuff a lot, you don't have to do that either. Do I stitch in the ditch when traveling or every single corresponding place in the block? Yes. Okay, so here's the thing, and I'm going to talk about this in an upcoming video with that home wall hanging. I love stitching in the ditch. I just think it makes the block look better. That's just stitching around the outside seam. I think it makes it just kind of pop. Now, it's optional. It's not required. It's totally up to you. But I also use stitching in the ditch to help me move my way around the quilt. So if I finish the block and it makes sense to quilt along that seam to get to the next block, I'm totally going to do that. Now, if I have, let's say, like the border where I quilted a swirl in that thing, I'm not going to stitch, obviously, in all those little seams. I'm going to stitch around the area I'm filling in. So in that border panel, like when I was doing that one side with the swirls and highlighting some of those triangles, then I'll stitch around the outside of that area. So it's not necessarily the block, it's the area I'm filling in. Hopefully that was clear as mud, right? What color thread would you use if you were quilting it with one design? I actually thought about that when I was quilting. I'm like, okay, this is a little tricky. I would go with the medium gray. Again, splitting the difference. If it's too light, the thread, it'll show up more on the dark, and if it's too dark, it'll show up on the light. So I'd probably go with a medium gray thread. But I will say, like, that's totally up to you. There's no right or wrong way to do that. So whatever you think looks better. In general, though, my preference is I prefer to use a lighter thread color on darker fabric than vice versa. So if I were forced to for that border to pick a thread color, I would rather go lighter on the darker side than darker on the lighter side, if that made any sense. Hopefully it did. Made sense to me. Well, thank you so much. I do love your questions. I appreciate you all watching the live chat. If you have enjoyed any of the live chats or any of the content I put out, I hope you'll give the video a thumbs up or subscribe so you can be notified when my videos come out. Again, I'll be back next week with the live chat on Thursday, 3 p.m. Central, where I'm going to talk all about the Hello Spring panel. That whole video series, give you all the details on that. And then our lucky winner is Angela D9699. So Angela D. Was that a little... I think Jessica picked it because she loves Angela. But anyway, Angela D, just email us at customerservice@quiltingismytherapy.com and we'll get that sent out to you. And if you want to learn any more about the videos, just click the link in the description box below. I hope you all have a safe and great weekend, and I will see you next week. Until then, everybody, happy quilting.